We jump to love-hate for the quarterbacks. And Matthew, yesterday on Early Line Alert, I read a stat for the Cowboys that they're averaging 40 points a game at home this season. That is the best in the NFL. For you, Dak Prescott headlines the love list for quarterbacks this week.
Yeah, he's been great at home so far this year, averaging over 25 fantasy points per game. And we know this Detroit secondary really struggles. Last month, they're a bottom 5 pass defense as well. The Cowboys have the second highest implied team total this week. This is a game the Cowboys desperately need. You heard me talk earlier about Tony Pollard, his struggles, and that I don't think he has a particularly good game. So in terms of how I think this game plays out, it's all going to be Dak Prescott, his arm. CeeDee Lamb, my guy, 8. You'll see some Brandon Cooks and Jake Ferguson in there as well. But he's my number 2 quarterback. Other than Jalen Hurts against Arizona, I don't think there's a quarterback you want to start in fantasy this week more than Dak Prescott.
Jay, is there any way he could get back in the MVP conversation, or is that completely done?
I just think the issue for him is he just doesn't have the high leverage spot. Like, he doesn't get to play Lamar Jackson. He doesn't get to play Josh Allen again. So I think it's going to be difficult for Dak. On merit, I think he should be top 3. Just his stats are incredible. And I thought that even though they lost the game and his stats weren't amazing against Miami, I thought he was magnificent in that game. The way that he absorbed the pass rush from the Dolphins, he was constantly under pressure, led them down the field for the game. Well, it looked like it was going to be the game-winning drive. And it just shows how silly MVP can be, that if Micah Parsons gets a strip sack on that final Miami drive, then Dak Prescott's the second favorite for MVP. He's got nothing to do with that. He did everything that he could in his power, but very favorable matchup against the Lions, certainly.
Speaking of favorable matchup, Brock Purdy, Matthew, against the Commanders. Purdy coming off, obviously, a disastrous game, but he comes in as a top 5 quarterback for you because of the matchup this week.
Yeah, if you survived Brock Purdy last week, you're in good news. Again, guess what? Great news. I have more bad Commander stats. I know people keep thinking I'm going to run out of them, but I'm not going to. They've allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. They allow passing touchdowns at the highest rate. They've given up at least 2 passing touchdowns in 10 of the last 12. They've allowed at least 28 points in 6 straight games. Pick a stat, any stat. My Commanders are awful, and Brock Purdy's going to have his way with him. He's my 5th-ranked quarterback this week.
All right, Jay, our next one here, Kyler Murray. He comes in as a top 10 quarterback for Matthew. He's got the Eagles. And with Kyler, since the return of injury, the rushing is still a factor here. Yeah, he's just such a threat when they get in close to the end zone. And I think the key is here, just like we mentioned, the Philadelphia pass defense is just completely drawing dead at the moment. So Kyler Murray, justifiably a top 7 quarterback this week.
Since week 8, I mean, we've talked about this Eagles defense. They're allowing 23.4 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Again, that's the most in the NFL since week 8. No one gives up more points to opposing quarterbacks. They're also allowing touchdown passes at the 3rd highest rate. So Murray, who's averaging at least 31 rushing yards per game since he returned, with at least 1 goal line carry in 4 of 6 games, should be in for another big week. He had over 20 fantasy points last week, and I'm his QB 7th this week.
A couple others receiving votes here, Matthew. Stafford at QB 8 against the Giants. C.J. Stroud against the Titans, assuming he's returning. And Geno Smith against the Steelers, right on the fringe there at QB 14 here, Matthew.
Stafford and Stroud both top 10 plays this week. He's playing against the Giants for Stafford, who's playing so well. 4 of the last 6 quarterbacks to face New York have scored at least 17 fantasy points. Since week 12, Stafford is a top 4 fantasy quarterback. We talked about Stroud earlier, 23 points per game at home. This game is in Houston. And Geno Smith, over the last 4 weeks, Steelers touchdown passes at the 5th highest rate. He's a top 15 option this week.
Okay, let's move over to the hate list with quarterbacks here. Tua Tagovailoa, of course, Jay. He's got the Ravens. He's QB 16 for Matthew. This is a massive game. MVP implications, playoff implications, seeding implications for the AFC, and a tough spot for Tua, with assuming no Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, I would say in the NFL discourse, the quarterback who is most analogous to Brock Purdy is probably Tua Tagovailoa, and we just saw what the Baltimore Ravens did to Brock Purdy, and I think that Tua will have trouble, particularly if Kyle Hamilton is able to go in that game, and particularly missing Jalen Waddle as well, potentially.
Matthew, first on Tua, are you considering sitting him in a lot of spots this week? Do you think the matchup is that bad? And then we'll move to the other hate list and Jake Browning.
Well, certainly if Jalen Waddle's not going to play, he wasn't spotted at practice today. So again, that is significant. If Jalen Waddle can't play against a Ravens defense that, by the way, have already allowed the fewest passing touchdowns this season, only 2 quarterbacks have scored at least 17 fantasy points against Baltimore. We just saw them destroy a red-hot Brock Purdy. So Tua's just QB 16 for me. If I had a better option, I would certainly consider it.
All right, we close out with Jake Browning. He's got the Chiefs. If you've been in a tough Superflex spot, Browning might have been useful to you this year, but maybe that luck has run out here, Matthew.
Once in their past 7 games, literally once in their past 7 games, have the Chiefs allowed multiple touchdown passes as well. They're a top 3 pass defense on the year. Since in the last 7 games, they're averaging under 15 fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. So again, probably don't expect Jamar Chase in this game. I think Browning is merely a low-end QB2 option. He's QB20 for me this week.
We're taking one more break. When we're back, it's time for last call. We got our best bets for Thursday night football, Jets, Browns, right after this.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.